Just to be clear before we start, I never said this game wasn't easy, and I won't be claiming that it isn't easy in this video either. First up, let's address a couple of things. After making the first video, there was a little misunderstanding, there was some exaggerating, there was blatant lying, some misplaced expectation, and of course there were valid concerns and counter-arguments in the comments section. I'll be doing an in-game test on some of the claims made in the comments shortly, but the more ludicrous ones need to be shut down immediately. First off, I had a couple of people claim that they took all their armor off, only used the base weapons, and still two-shot bosses who were higher level than them. That is just a straight up lie, and look, I get it. Some people like a challenging game, and that's fine. Maybe this game isn't for you, even though there are challenges out there, which I'll prove in a minute. But you aren't helping your cause by making ludicrous claims like that. I even had one guy claim he got to a boss that was 3 levels higher than him, and he went and made a bowl of cereal, did nothing, and apparently the game just beat the boss by itself without him even touching the controller. He didn't specify which boss though, strangely. Second, I actually had more than a few people complain about the first boss being too easy. The first boss. It makes me wonder if they've ever played an RPG before. The first boss is little more than a tutorial. Of course it's easy. The first boss in Final Fantasy IX is Baku, which is a 4-on-1 fight where the boss has a 50% failure rate on his own attacks. It's essentially impossible to fail that fight. It's easy, just like pretty much every other first boss in every other RPG ever made. Your expectations are just out of whack with game design. Thirdly, you really should play more than a handful of hours before decrying the game as too easy. You've barely scratched the surface. You've barely made it out of the tutorial. Also, this is a bit of a last minute one, but it is possible a game can challenge you in more ways than just combat. I've had some 11,000 people watch my Trial of Knowledge guide over the last few days, so the puzzles seem to be challenging someone out there. And finally, let's get to the main point of this video. In my last video where I explained that the game is largely easy, but to me a game isn't too easy unless it's caused by a lack of player interaction, and then I went on to rattle off all the things you can do in combat and how that keeps players engaged. Now, most counter-arguments to this were that it doesn't matter how many mechanics there are if you don't need to use them. And then there were varying degrees of anecdotes about being able to kill everything just by pressing square, never needing to dodge, never needing to interact with higgledies, never needing to use healing items, or being able to face tank everything and just use healing items, and the list goes on and on. At one point I was going to say put up or shut up, as in you upload a video and show me that you can beat everything just by pressing square and never dodging, but then I thought, why don't I just do this myself? I devised a relatively easy test, and while doing so, I found that I was able to test multiple complaints. A few people said that the lack of difficulty makes the loot system pointless, you don't need that shiny new sword because the game is too easy. And a very misguided person said that the lack of difficulty also completely ruins exploration. Why explore when there are no challenges to overcome? Maybe I missed the memo, but I wasn't quite sure when exploration in games became about overcoming challenges, but what the hell, might as well put that to the test as well. The main thing I wanted to test though was how much interaction was needed to win a fight. A majority of counter-arguments said that you could simply face tank, spam square, and just use healing items when you got low, so that's what I wanted to test. I found a tainted monster, which is a sort of mini-boss, that I actually slightly out-leveled. I was going to do the test on one that was 2 levels above me, but I wanted to make sure I wasn't skewing the advantage to the monster. I used decent gear for my level, with a mixture of rarities, and I also used some decent higgledies that had been leveled up. Leveling higgledies is totally optional and has to be done by using a special building in your kingdom, so many people aren't even going to have theirs leveled at all. I went into the fight with the goal of killing it with certain restrictions. I could only use the light attack and ranged attack to deal damage, I could not interact with higgledies, I could not use the dodge button, I was allowed to use as many items as I wanted though. But I would still play with some sense and competence given these restrictions. For example, I found that this particular tainted monster had an attack where he would wind up and spin around the battlefield. It did a lot of damage, so I made conscious efforts to avoid it without using the dodge button. So what were the results? I used every single healing item the game allowed, which included 10 Soraways and 8 3-leaf Soraways. I also used a total of 6 resurrect items, and I barely got the boss to half health after roughly 3.5 minutes before getting a game over. Now, I won't make it seem more dramatic than it really was. Regular Soraways at this point don't offer a whole lot of healing, so it would be better to think of it as around 11 3-leaf Soraways, which heal a majority of my character's health. Given this experience though, I could have used any attack I wanted and I wouldn't have beat this boss without dodging and using higgledies. Next, I wanted to use the same gear, same characters, same everything, but this time utilize everything at my disposal. I was going to play the game the way it was intended. I'll use the dodge button, I'll use other attacks, and freely interact with higgledies. This time I managed to get the boss down in just over 4 minutes, but I still used 7 3-leaf Soraways to do it, in addition to the nice bit of healing I got from my higgledies. I was super active during this fight. I used the dodge button a lot, used special attacks as often as I could, and interacted with higgledies at every opportunity. The final test I wanted to do was using crazy OP gear and crazy OP higgledies for the level I am at. I also switched out one of my characters to another which was an even higher level. This is actually the team I have been using for the last 10 or so hours in the game. The gear that I'm using is far better than anything the average player will have at this point. It requires over 15 hours in the Kingdom Builder alone, not counting the side quests for the specific civilians you need. The weapons and armor are maxed out, crafted items that you will not have access to at this point unless you stop progressing the story and did nothing but kingdom building for hours and hours and hours like I did. I also used max level higgledies that are all higher rarity. They have a team cost of 2 or more, and one of these higgledies can deliver a special attack that deals over 3000 damage in one hit. This time it took just over 3 minutes to beat the Tainted Monster. I still needed to use 6 3-leaf Soraways, and I used all 10 of the normal ones as well this time round. Again, I was super active in this fight. I needed to dodge, I needed to use higgledies, I needed to make use of the healing items. This was still a challenging fight. I don't know about you, but I learned 2 things right off the bat. 1, there is, in fact, a good reason to explore. The best challenges and toughest fights you are going to find in Ni No Kuni 2 are likely to be tainted monsters which can only be found by exploring the world. And 2, there is also a good reason to upgrade your gear and make use of the loot system. I was able to shave a decent amount of time off this boss kill by using better gear, and the same goes for higgledies. Now, what does it mean for this game being too easy? Well, I think you might want to play more than a few hours before making that judgment. And I also think that if you're making the claim that you don't need to do anything to win, you are embellishing at least a little bit. I think people are downplaying just how much you do need to interact in battles. It goes back to what I said in the first video. You are required to engage and use a bunch of mechanics at your disposal, but you generally aren't going to be punished with insta-death the second you make a mistake. I won't for a second make the argument that there shouldn't be a difficulty slider in the game. I think more options are always good, and there are some people who would prefer a really tough game. I'll also say that a lot of the story content probably isn't going to challenge you as much as a Tainted Monster will. But to me, this means the game flows better. It is, after all, a story-driven RPG. The focus here isn't on the combat. Combat is what ties gameplay sections together. Personally, I would rather have the ability to get through the main story relatively easy without grinding or level requirements. And what we've learnt is that if you do want a challenge, you can go and find one. At the end of the day, difficulty is largely subjective. What might be a walk in the park for some will challenge others. And while most would agree that a chunk of Ni No Kuni 2's content is easy, I am far from classifying it as too easy. But hey, maybe you disagree with that, and that's fine. I do hope they add a hard mode or difficulty slider at some point, because it really is a shame that the current difficulty might be ruining a really great game for some of you out there. But you may want to push on just a little more and do some exploring. There are challenges out there for you to find. If you want to leave a comment or hit us with other counter arguments, that's totally fine, but I feel like I've been respectful to most of your opinions here, so keep it above board. I'd rather have a healthy conversation with you than have to delete your comment because it's nothing but name calling and profanity. Thanks for liking, subscribing, and sharing, and I'll see you all soon.